Okay, so like yesterday, this one will be recorded and it will be put on YouTube. The slideshow that I'm going to show you, I've already loaded up onto the project folders. So if you go under English, Revision 2012, you'll get this and you'll be able to revise from it. So we're starting with Of Mice and Men. You'll remember from yesterday that I suggest you always start not with the book, not with the novel, but with the marking criteria. What do the examiners want from me? And the reason for that is simple. Most of you know the novel inside out. That's actually not what's going to get you the marks. You'll remember that I start with what the examiners want, then I translate them. It's exactly the same marking as the inspector calls. Yes, so the examiners are looking for the same thing. You will remember that sustained just means I keep quoting. Interpretation. How do you show the examiner that you're interpreting? Because you have therefore and because. Does the examiner mind if you just write because 15 times? No. Or it'll bore them a bit, they'll still give you the marks. So you always put that in. Hopefully, you remember this bit. This is the bit that students often don't do in the exam. They just write about Lenny or George. They don't write about why Steinbeck creates Lenny to be like this. Why Steinbeck creates George to be like this. That's where your C grade is. Why does Steinbeck do it? And finally, you've got to talk about the audience. And the audience with this is the reader, it's we and us. And if you write, we feel that, or Steinbeck wants us to believe that, you automatically get the C grade. Okay, so that's the basics of how to succeed. Let's move up the grades. Just like yesterday when I talked about the inspector calls, the examiners actually show us what D looks like. Lenny is compared to a bear, which makes him seem strong. And that's not much of an explanation, that just gives you a D. How do you get the C? Well, you have a longer explanation. Remember I told you to use the word because. So Lenny is compared to a bear because, like a bear, he is strong, unpredictable and dangerous. That might be enough to get you a C, but let's make sure. Quality shown when, without warning, he kills Curly's wife. You will notice as well that the quotation is short, it's one word long. Examiners love that. It means you're writing a lot about a little. That's something I'll come back to later. The shorter your quotation, the higher your mark. Another reason for that is you're in an exam, and you're writing at speed. You don't get marks for writing long quotations. You get marks for how you explain them. So if you have a short quotation, you instantly go into the stuff that gets you marks, the explanation. So keep your quotation short. Do you remember I talked to you about methods, this stupid word that the examiners put in the question? It's actually in the question. What does it mean? Well, it means represents. So Lenny might represent innocence. You know, this is what men are like in their most innocent state. He's just like a 5-year-old. Carlson, who has the Luger that he uses to kill Candy's dog, he might represent the violence of men. Curly's wife, she represents how women are treated in a male society. So methods means explain what is being represented. Use the word represents and you'll get the grade. Band 4, this is where the B is. Again, I'll translate the examiner's mark scheme so that it makes sense to me. Well, qualified, brilliant. Hopefully you remember. If I'm qualifying something, I'm saying, well, this, but maybe that. Those words force me to do maybe this, maybe that. Alternatively, on the other hand, whereas. If I use those words, they force me to get a grade B. Yeah, and that's important. You don't need to know loads about Of Mice and Men to get the grade B. You just have to do that. I'm going to compare this idea with that idea. In contrast, whereas, however, automatically the examiner has to consider the grade B. you're going to use this kind of language because you'll show that you're considering. Not Lenny is violent, but Lenny appears to be violent. Why only appears? Well, he's not doing it on purpose, is he? He never kills Curly's wife on purpose. He refuses to fight Curly. And so you use the word appears. It seems that. And that forces the examiner to say, this candidate is considering. I've got to give them a B. How to get a C? Well, obviously, if you put some of the B grade skills in, you're going to get a C. And so I would recommend all of you forget about the C grade and just aim for at least a B. Because even if you only do B grade writing a couple of times, it will be impossible to get below a C. Even if the rest of your writing doesn't even get to a C. Because you've got some B grade writing in there, you will get at least a C, guaranteed. How to get an A or an A star, these are the next two bands. And like yesterday, I'm going to say to you this. If you can get a B, you're already halfway to an A. There's very little more we have to add in. Let's take a look at it. Again, that's the criteria. And these are the words that the examiners use all the time. Write a lot about a little. The explanations are long, quotations are short. That's an A skill. Often thinking about possible alternative interpretations. Do you remember for the B, perhaps this or maybe that, that's also in the A. That's good news, because most of you can do that quite comfortably. There's the teacher speak. There it is translated into what do I actually do? Well, I'm going to have more than one interpretation. And so like I did with the characters in Inspector Calls, I'm going to try and show you two interpretations for each character in Of Mice and Men. And if you just learn those, or do your own versions, you're guaranteed to be into the A grade. Have more than one interpretation. And I'm guiding you here. I want you to interpret the character. You can all do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to ask you to interpret the role of God in the novel. It tends not to be in the study guides. And so the examiners will go, ooh, I'm not used to seeing this before. This has got to be an A. Or maybe it should be an A star. So pay attention when I get to the religious bit that comes towards the end. If you can use some of that, you're definitely into the A and A star grade. And obviously, you have to write about Steinbeck. Do you remember you had to write about him at the C grade? And it's the same thing at the A grade. It's not a massive jump. Right, A star. In an Inspector Calls, the examiners didn't tell you to do that. That's not in the question. With Of Mice and Men, luckily, that is in the question. They are fairer to you with this. Well, what's the difference? It's that word, evaluation, again. So to move from A to A star, I have to evaluate. Well, what does evaluate look like? Lenny is completely innocent. He doesn't know how serious the violence is. He doesn't know the implications of what he's doing. He only ever says, I've done another bad thing. On the other hand, when George is just about to kill him, Lenny imagines a perfect conversation with his Aunt Clara, with a giant rabbit. Extraordinary conversations which make absolute sense, and he knows that he has done wrong. So an alternative point of view is that Lenny now finally realises that he has committed a sin. Two completely alternative points of view. To evaluate, I'm going to go back to Steinbeck. Perhaps Steinbeck wants us to think that Lenny deserves to be killed. And so George is doing the right thing morally. Yeah, there's an evaluation. I just come down on one side of the argument. If you can do that, you're showing the examiner you're using A-star skills. So I'll remind you, I evaluated by coming back to what I think Steinbeck wants us to believe. Simple for you to do, not simple for you to remember under exam conditions. If you remember it, You're in the A star category. So, let's look at the past questions. You will notice, just like the inspector calls, so it's always question 17 and 18, Mice and Men is always question 21. It's always divided into A and B, so you have to write two parts. The examiners don't say to you, I want you to spend this much time on this one and this much time on the other. It's up to you to split your time in half. Okay? What methods does Steinbeck use in this passage to present candy? It's the next thing you need to know. You will always get given a bit of the book to write about. Let's just think about that a moment. You're walking into an exam, and the examiner is giving you the answer. Isn't that amazing? I can't believe they're doing this. So they actually give you a section about that long with all the quotations you need to answer part A. They give you the answer. Do you remember I told you the shorter the quotation the better? So if you've been in my class, you'll know the random finger technique. I'll show you that a bit later. You can just pick any word and write about it. You'll be able to instantly get into the A grade. They're giving the answer away. We'll look at what part B means. This is the important bit. Write about the novel as a whole, which brings us back to Steinbeck. What is Steinbeck getting at? What does he want us to feel and think? If you do that, you're automatically on an A. Let's look at the question again. That question there tells you. Look at the novel as a whole, and we know that if you do that, you get an A. Once again, the examiners are giving you the marks. I don't know how long this exam will last. I can't believe how brilliant it is, because they're just asking you to do well. However, that same sort of question, people still go wrong on. So the examiners say, look, this is what happens. When they're writing about the whole novel and they write about the context, they just write about everything they know about the Depression or everything they know about migrant workers. What they don't do is explain what that's got to do with the novel as a whole. So here was a question on Curly's wife. And so people wrote loads of stuff about Curly's wife, but then they forgot to say how she represents women in society. You've got to do that when you do it, when you answer the question. Look at the novel as a whole. Part B, the examiner's view of methods. Methods were often not identified, so you've got to use that. He uses symbol to represent this. Use the word represents. Context. I'm just going to pause a minute. I'm starting to drip, as you can see. Is there any air conditioning I can have on?
It's on, in fact.
It's on already, is it? God, this is going to make great viewing, isn't it? Never mind. Sorry. Right, here we go. The random finger technique. Thank you. Are you ready? That puts the laser. So just laser me something. Top one. So, right, I've got to write about this one, yeah? You can remember anything if there's anything to eat in it. Okay? This symbolises Lenny's animal nature. His only memory is about food. This is exactly how animals behave. Perhaps Steinbeck is suggesting all men are like animals following animal instincts. So I did that, made it up off the top of my head. Squirt me something else. 4 of diamonds, brilliant. Okay, here we go. Right, George, I'm speaking. George is always playing cards. This possibly represents the role of luck and fate in the story. And so, at the end, George says, I guess I always knew. That suggests fate is always leading Lenny to his death. George was always going to end up having to kill him. And that's represented in the card game. Perhaps Steinbeck uses the suit of diamonds to point out that the reason men behave so brutally towards each other is their poverty. So he uses the diamonds to contrast with the poverty of the lives of the men on the ranch. I didn't know I was going to say that. I just made it up. The examiner is giving me the answer. Okay? That's what I mean by the random finger technique. The worst thing you can do when you're in the exam is say, oh, I've got to think about this, I'm not sure what to write. Follow your instincts. Yeah, follow your instincts and you'll get it right. Oh, there's another one. Go on. Zap me. Huh? There. He felt safe now and he spoke more confidently. Brilliant. So this is Candy speaking. This is ironic. Candy feels safe, yet in 2 days' time, he's going to have the dream of the ranch that he'll share with Lenny and George ripped away from him. Steinbeck is offering Candy hope here, only to take it away later. Perhaps Steinbeck is suggesting there is no hope. Poverty in America is so bad that these men will never recover. Okay, I just made that up as well. That's what you do in the exam. Context. Now this is quite interesting. This is what the examiners say context is. So this must have been a question about Crooks or Curly's wife, or Candy. They're used to show some discrimination in society. This must be Crooks, segregation in society. Black people kept away from white people. The roles of work in society. To be a real man, you need to be working. Candy can't face a life without work. You know, that's why he offers to go and work on the ranch. Crooks needs a life with work. He offers to go and work on the ranch. Now, there's nothing in there about the Dust Bowl, about the Great Depression, about the concentration camps that the Californians set up to put the migrant workers in. The words migrant workers never appear. And so this is a message from the examiners. Don't tell us all the stuff you know about 1930s America. We don't care. We do care about your ideas. So how do you think the novel uses the idea of poverty or uses the idea of the migrant workers? And so that's your job. Think about how the history affects the novel. Don't just write about the history. They don't care. Question 21. How does Steinbeck use a relation in the novel? Again in part B, the examiner is giving the A grade away. Write about the whole novel. I want to give you an A grade. Again, the context, look. Nothing about migrant workers, nothing about the Dust Bowl, nothing about the Depression. In other words, you could answer this. What do you know about disability in 1930s America? Well, nothing. But yes, you do, because you've got Lenny in the book, and you've got Candy in the book with one hand. Yeah, and all the answers are in your reactions to the novel. The answers are already there. You haven't got to go and study any history for it. Oh, look, at last we've got the American dream. The idea of being canned. Do you remember that George says, don't tell anyone. If the boss finds out, they're likely to can us. And this idea that people have turned so spiteful towards each other that if they let anyone know that they've got a chance of realising their ambition, the bosses will take it away from them. Use that. It'll be relevant to most questions. Right. I've covered that. We'll skip some questions and we'll move on to what context means. The problem with candidates writing about the context is they didn't link it to their knowledge of the text. So I kept saying that. Go back to the text. Don't worry about the history. Most candidates could write all about the Depression and the American Dream. Didn't impress the examiners though. They want to know what you think about the novel. Well, what do you do for an A star? The very best candidates wrote about an interesting range of contents. For example, identifying the role of Aunt Clara in George and Lenny's friendship, and then contrasting the presentation of Aunt Clara as an idealised portrayal of a homemaker who makes cakes and shows concern for the childlike Lenny's welfare. So, in other words, the novel is the context. Yeah? How do people behave in this society, in this novel? That's all you need to think about. Let's think about how women are portrayed here. $2 for a glass of whiskey, $2.50 to buy sex with a woman. What's Steinbeck saying about how women are valued in this society? Yeah? Thank you. It's a rhetorical question, but you spot on. Yeah? So, I can probably get at least 6 shots of whiskey from a bottle, and so that's at least 3 times, my math's not very good, 3 times more valuable than sex with a woman is a bottle of whiskey. Incredible. And what's even more incredible is that Susie, if you remember, has got 6 girls. And she's not the only brothel in town. There's also Clara's. You know, so this is a society that treats women with no respect, and even worse, the women are so poor that they have to put up with it. You know, there are lots of women who have to sell themselves. Now, why is that important? Well, that explains a lot about Curly's wife, doesn't it? You might think she's ridiculously stupid to suddenly shack up with Curly after only just meeting her. But if the alternative is real poverty, that might one day mean she has to sell herself, suddenly marrying the boss's son on a ranch in the most fertile the most fertile state in America, California, suddenly that doesn't look so stupid. It's not romantic, but it's going to give her a hell of a life compared to what she had before. So, Carlson. I haven't got a quotation for Carlson, I hope. No, that's true. It's very difficult with Carlson to have more than one point of view. He's just an obnoxious character, isn't he? I will give you another point of view about Carlson at the end. But Carlson is there to show one aspect of masculinity. The violent animal aspect that just wants to kill. He pretends to Candy that he's doing him a favour by killing his old, smelly, rheumatic dog. But actually, he wants to kill. My single one-word quotation to show that he wants to kill is going to be Luger. Luger is a German gun. At the time that Steinbeck is writing, it's associated with the First World War, and it's also associated with the build-up to the Second World War. And so that's a shorthand, a symbol. Carlson is automatically violent and evil. He's like a Nazi. Yeah, and Steinbeck does that just with that single image. Normally, in America, he'd have a revolver. It would be a Colt 45. No. Steinbeck deliberately gives him the Luger to show what some men are actually like. Lenny. There's lots we could say about him. I'm going to give you one quotation. George was watching the door. He said ominously, well, he'd better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter, but Lenny's strong and quick. And Lenny don't know no rules. He walked to the square table and sat down on one of the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled. And so the most important bit for me, is this. Lenny don't know no rules. Because that gets to the heart of what society is for. We have to have rules in society. Otherwise, we just turn to our basic instincts. What would Carlson be like if there were no rules? Who would he actually kill? Lenny is the most innocent person you could ever get. But because he knows no rules, he's lethal. Look at what he does to Curly's hand. You know, imagine if that fight had happened, but he had Curly's neck. George would never have got him off in time. You know, Lenny is lethal, even though he's completely innocent. You couldn't imagine a more innocent person. He doesn't understand racism. He doesn't understand sex. He's got no idea about all the things that we understand so easily. He's completely innocent, and yet a complete killer. So, is Steinbeck suggesting that underneath it all, That's what men are like. Yeah, without rules, do we all turn to murder? If you've read Lord of the Flies, you'll have a strong idea about this. You can argue, no, that's not what they're like. Or you can argue that is what they're like. George. Here's my quotation with George. I put God in it. Remember I said examiners aren't used to seeing that. If you look at this novel, it's full of references to hell, to Jesus, to God. It's a very religious novel. I'll show you how that works a little later on. You could look at this as a prayer. God Almighty, he says to Lenny, if I was alone I could live so easy. The normal view of George, the normal view, is that he is, underneath it, a fundamentally good guy. He really respects Lenny. He's treated him badly in the past, and he regrets it. He apologises for getting angry with him after this. He says, I've been mean, ain't I? And so the safe thing to write is that although George has moved to violent language, he's given up violence and he's got Lenny's best interests at heart. But I want my A or an A star, and so I'm going to look at that. What if this is actually a prayer? What if he's praying to be released from Lenny? Suddenly, that gives us a different way of looking at when he kills Lenny. Yes, it's for Lenny's own good, because Curly's going to torture him by shooting him in the gut. But it also means he's free of Lenny forever. You know, at the end of the book, has God answered George's prayers? That's something to think about. There's an A star in you thinking about that, whichever answer you come up with. Curly. Well, there's so much that I could pick on here. I'm going to pick on that. You've seen that glove on his left hand. The glove reminds us of his personality as a boxer. Again, Steinbeck suggesting, through so many of his male characters, that men are essentially violent. And not just are they violent, that's how they sort out status between each other. It's through violence. When Curly tries to sort Slim out, he wants to go and beat him up. But Slim stands up to him, and Curly has to stand down. Everything is sorted out through violence. Even the ending. George kills Lenny. It's a violent solution. What's inside the glove? A handful of Vaseline. You know, so this is how a certain type of man treats women. His wife is only a sex object. That's all she is to him. You remember she's got no name. What's the difference between having a hand with Vaseline in it in the glove or telling everyone that's what you've got? Yeah, so suddenly, not only is she just there for his sexual pleasure, she's there to increase his status. His hand says to everyone, this is what I've got. You haven't got one, because your status is beneath mine. And so Steinbeck is also looking at how women are used in society. All that comes from just that image there. I can talk about the role of men and the role of women. I love that because I've got a short quotation that allows me to write a lot about a little. You've seen what they've done to my dog tonight. That should say Candy, sorry. I'm going to focus on that with Candy because this is a method. Steinbeck uses the dog, the old dog that's going to be put out of its misery, to represent Candy. To represent how society treats old people. To represent how society treats the useless. Remember, Candy has lost his hand in a machine and he's only being kept on for charity. He knows he is going to get canned and he'd rather be shot. It shows us the value of work to a man. Yeah, so actually I don't have to improve my status through violence. I can also improve my status by doing something worthwhile, by working. Slim. I'll come back to the ending. I'm going to pick another quotation for Slim. There is the godlike bit again. George looked over at Slim and saw the calm, godlike eyes fastened on him. So Slim is a construct. Do you remember I used that word talking about Inspector Calls? Steinbeck has constructed him for a purpose. What does he want to show when he constructs Slim? Slim has the power of life and death. He is the one who says, yes, it's okay to kill Candy's dog. He is the one who, when his dog has too many puppies, he drowns 4 of them straight away, without a second's thought, because it gives the others a better chance of life. He is the one who says to George at the end, never you mind, a guy got you sometimes. Yeah, you just had to kill Lenny, that's just the way it is. On one hand, he is the ideal sort of man. Completely fair. Doesn't let the emotion of the moment get in his way. He just makes a rational decision. So we could argue, Steinbeck says this is the way men should behave. On the other hand, because I want these to be, alternatively, he could be showing even the best of men is still violent, is still happy to kill. You know, that's in all of us. If Steinbeck thinks that, I want my A star, I'm going to evaluate. Perhaps Steinbeck is suggesting there is no hope for mankind at all. Whatever rules we have in society, in the end, we'll always have violence, we'll always have killing, we'll always have murder, we'll always have war. We're all born with sin, and there's no escape from it. You could look at it that way. Crooks. This is an extraordinary thing. Crooks is black at a time when there is no civil rights movement in America. There aren't millions marching in the street listening to Martin Luther King saying, I have a dream. That doesn't happen for nearly 30 years. So 30 years before people started to think, actually, maybe we should have a fairer society, Steinbeck is saying we should have a fairer society. How do we know that that's what he's doing? Well, if you took Crooks out of the novel, Lenny and George still have to come from weed. They still go to the ranch. Lenny still kills the puppy. Lenny still kills Curly's wife. George still kills Lenny. The story is the same. Doesn't need Crooks for the story. He needs Crooks for an idea, a big idea. And his big idea is, look, you white Americans who are reading this, have we got this wrong? Do we need to change our society, not just with the way they treat women, not just the way that poverty makes us violent, but look at the way we treat black people in our country. I've chosen a quotation, however, that doesn't just show Crooks as a victim. Yes, I can get into my A grade by talking about how his crooked back symbolises racism on top of his shoulders, and he's carrying the racism of this society around with him. I can talk about the fact that his barn is deliberately placed, his accommodation, next to the horses, next to the manure. That's how society treats him. I can do all that and get my A. But I want something that's going to give me an alternative. And so this quotation looks at the fact that he loves torturing Lenny. He isn't a wholly pleasant character. Well, why does Steinbeck do that? I don't know. I'm going to make some reasons up. Perhaps he does it to say, look, we're all like this. We're all capable of evil. Black and white, the same. Or perhaps he's doing it to say, look, this is what we've done to him. Because we've treated him in this way, because we treat our black society this way, it's natural that they will react against us when they can. You decide what you want to say, but the alternative view forces you into the A and the A star. Curly's wife. It's very easy to portray Curly's wife as a stupid girl, she's only about 16, who has made an appalling decision. And I've tried to show you that there are other ways of looking at that, given the value of women in this society. This is the final description of her. Curly's wife lay with a half covering of yellow hay, and the meanness and the plannings and the discontent and the ache for attention were all gone from her face. She was very pretty and simple, and her face was sweet and young. Now her rouged cheeks and her reddened lips made her seem alive and sleeping very lightly. The curls, the tiny little sausages, were spread on the hay behind her head, and her lips were parted. You know, we get to the ending, and suddenly she's a child again. So perhaps Steinbeck is asking us to think, everything we saw before, was that produced by the way men treated her? Is that what made her mean? Everything we saw before makes us ask, is that how poverty has made her? You know, she dreams of being in pictures, doesn't she? She dreams of escape. Is that because she's had an incredibly poor life? The other thing it makes us do is look at her youth. What an end to a life that's so young. So at the ending, he asks us to sympathise with her. Why is that? Why does he want us to sympathise with her? He hasn't even allowed her a name before. Maybe he's trying to get us to think about how women are treated in this society. Yeah, how they're constantly judged. Andy, when he sees her dead body, he says, "You goddamn tart." He still blames her. Even when she's dead, it's like it was her fault. Yeah, and that's something that's still in our society today. With rape cases, you'll see that mentioned often. Oh, she was asking for it. And that's the same idea that's here. This idea of blaming a woman just because she's a woman. Candy. Here we go. Oh, I got that quotation wrong. I said you goddamn tart. It's actually you goddamn tramp. You done it, didn't you? I suppose you're glad. Everybody knows you'd mess things up. Well, he's just given us this picture of Curly's wife. Is he doing this to condemn men and the way men look at it? Or is he doing it to criticise the older generation? Is it possible that in the future things would change? If you look at George, he agrees, doesn't he? There isn't a male in this whole novel who actually has any sympathy for Curly's wife. None of them at all. And so you could look at this as an attack against what it is to be a man. You know, it'd be interesting if a male writer's actually doing that. You can look at the novel that way. Fate. So these are the methods again. George on the Lost Dream. I think I know from the very first, I think I know we'd never do her. This is the ranch. Okay? Look at the language that he uses to describe something he wants. Deliberately sexual. But not just sexual, unpleasant. Do her. Yeah, there were some giggles when I mentioned it. Even the language when they're talking about something feminine is unpleasant. But think about this. One way of looking at the novel is that there was no way George was ever going to stop Lenny. It was always fated that Lenny would do something more and more violent. First, he comes with the dead mouse, then it gets bigger with the dead puppy, then he kills Curly's wife. And the pattern suggests that it's going to get bigger and bigger and it's going to get worse and worse. And Steinbeck invites us to think that. But actually, fate doesn't stop George and Crooks and Candy getting this ranch. Because Candy's already put up most of the money. Yeah, George has said, I think we'll swing her, we'll be able to do it. The thing that stops George getting the dream is that he stops believing in the dream. It's not fate at all. You know, it's another time when Steinbeck is asking us to question how we think and behave. Friendship. This is another method. You're bound to get asked a question on George and Lenny. I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. It's easy to write about that, isn't it? About how George and Lenny are unusual. I got you and you got me. We're going to live off the fat of the land. But when you get to the ending, the irony is that that's gone. George has killed Lenny. You can write about that irony for your A and the A star. I've talked a lot about the role of men and the American dream. Loneliness, I'm sure you're very familiar with. This is a novel that starts with the word soledad. You know, that's where it's set. Spanish for loneliness. And that's Steinbeck's theme. All men in the end are lonely. And women. So Curly's wife's tragedy, the reason she goes to Lenny in the first place, she's lonely. Candy wants a good marriage, but he has no way, he doesn't know how to treat his wife. He's lonely. George is ultimately lonely because he kills his friend. Slim is alone. There's no partner there. Crooks is alone. Candy, everyone is left alone. Is Steinbeck doing this to show that we can actually learn to get together, lead a better life? Or is he saying, no matter what you do, actually it all ends in loneliness and death? Pressing, if you take that view. Right, I told you that the religious imagery in this book isn't necessarily in the study guides. So let's have a little think about it. The Easter story goes like this. Jesus is crucified on Good Friday. Okay, on the Saturday, he's buried. On the Sunday, he rises again. The fact that he rises again proves the existence of God. So if you go into church, you will recite the creed, and in the creed, this is what you talk about. You talk about believing that Jesus was the Son of God, and believing that he died and rose again. That's what makes someone a Christian. So what does Steinbeck do? He takes that idea and he turns it completely upside down. They arrive on the Friday, both alive. On Saturday, instead of being buried, Lenny hears from George and Candy that they're going to go to heaven. They're going to get this dream ranch. They've got the money. They can do it. Heaven is presented to them on Saturday. On Sunday, Lenny kills Curly's wife. George kills Lenny. No resurrection. No coming back to life. And so, here's my A star. I've got to evaluate what's going on here. Why does Steinbeck turn it on its head? Is it because he wants to show that there is no heaven? That there is no hope? That God is just an illusion? Crook says that. He says there ain't no heaven. Is that what Steinbeck's trying to show us? Ultimately, we're all going to end up miserable. Or is he doing it the other way? Saying, look, this is what our society is doing to us. We've got the wrong rules. If we stopped all the poverty, men would behave better to each other. That is like getting a second chance. People would be able to believe again. There could be a heaven. There could be a God. Two completely contradictory interpretations. And I'm not going to shove you towards one or the other, but if you deal with that question there, that's a guaranteed A-star bit of thinking to do. You can easily link it to the Eden-like setting that you get at the beginning. These little rabbits coming down, even though there are tracks of other animals, they don't fear being killed. The only time they turn into statues and threatened is when the men appear. The men dressed like soldiers in denim uniform. George and Lenny. Lenny bringing death with him. Other religious symbolism is the idea of original sin. So if you look back at the Christian teaching, the idea goes like this. Because of Adam and Eve going against God, everyone carries that sin with them. Why is that relevant? Well, Lenny is our perfect, innocent character, isn't he? He is like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. He doesn't know evil. And yet, even though he's completely innocent, just like Adam and Eve, he completely goes against God. And that, so Steinbeck could be suggesting, look, we're all born with the capacity for evil. We're all actually born evil. And what we need to do is change our society to remember to be good. Or, because I want my A star, No, he doesn't think it's possible. He thinks we're all born evil and that's it. It's never going to get any better. We'll always end up doing this to each other. You've got to decide for yourself which way he's going. Now we come to the ending. Just like with an inspector calls, I'm going to ask you always to write about the ending. Why? The ending is always where Steinbeck, the writer, is going to tie up his ideas. Do you remember you have to write about Steinbeck? So if you write about the ending, that forces you to get the grade. At the ending, we've got these two possible ways of ending the novel. Slim said, "You had her, George, I swear you had her. Come on with me." He led George into the entrance of the trail and up towards the highway. So we could read the ending like this. George is supported by Slim. Two men with real companionship. What George had with Lenny is now improved with what he has with Slim. Slim understands him. But what he says, you had her, he's put himself in George's shoes. So this is an image of hope, isn't it? Look at the language he used to describe it. The highway, as though going up towards something good. You know, everything suggests there that despite the fact that George has killed his best friend, there is hope for a better future. But he doesn't end there. Instead, he gives us this. Curly and Carlson looked after them. And Carlson said, "Now what the hell you suppose is eating them two guys?" So I've got an alternative. An alternative being, that's what most men are like. Carlson can't put himself into George's shoes. He doesn't understand why George isn't happy that he's killed Lenny. Yeah, he thinks that's what a man should do. Even Curly thinks that. That's what a man should do. So we're getting a completely different idea. Instead of ending with the idea of a heaven-like setting, the highway, he takes us back to hell. You know, back to that idea of original sin. Is that where we're all going to end up? You know, is hell what's waiting for us because we're all ultimately evil? You've got to decide that, what you think Steinbeck is up to. Finally, I want you to consider George here. You could see George as the most noble character in the book. Imagine George believes in heaven and hell and he believes in God. When he takes Carlson's Luger and kills his best friend, he's giving up his own hope of heaven. Yeah, if he's a Christian, he knows he's going to send his soul to hell, but he does that to help his friend. Yeah, so you can look at George as the most incredibly generous character. So I've talked a lot about religion now. Hope some of it you'll be able to remember. You don't have to put all of it in. You don't have much time in the exam. Just a little reference here and there will guarantee you the A and the A-star grade. Okay? Thank you very much for listening so well. You were very, very good today. Could I ask all of you to help me this time get the library back? Because I have to do it with just about 6